Hello everybody, my name is Shrouded Panda and today we're going to be discussing a game that was near and dear to me, Dark Cloud. One of the first games I beat as a child and one of the most unique RPGs I've ever played, whose elements have not been replicated nor have been seen together in any other game since, at least to my knowledge. Dark Cloud was developed by Level 5 and was their first AAA title and the second game they've ever worked on, the first being Overblood 2 for the original PlayStation. All this started with one man by the name of Akihiro Hino, who, till this day, at the time of writing this at least, is still the acting president and CEO of Level 5. You most likely know him because of the Ni no Kuni series, the White Knight Chronicles series, Yokai Watch, or the Professor Layton series, of which he either wrote for, directed, or produced, or in some cases, all three. Talented does not begin to describe this man, and the legacy that he has built and will leave behind when he has finally decided to call it a day. But before we get to all that, we have to start at the beginning. River Hillsoft, and Sony. After the release of Overblood 2 in July of 1998, Hino, a programmer turned lead developer for River Hillsoft, left the company along with his development team to form Level 5 in October of the very same year. While hopes were high for the future, Akihiro did not believe at the time that his team could become an independent developer. So to get some stable footing, he formed a partnership with Sony, who at the time was developing the PlayStation 2. The deal was that they could develop games for the PlayStation 2, but they would have to set up a company, so Level 5 was born. Interesting fact, the name Level 5 is a reference to the 5 stars given on a Japanese report card in school, and is the highest possible mark one can receive. Another fact is that his development team had just 9 people on the roster at the time, with 2 people joining on soon after, maxing out the crew at just 11 people. Both of these were mentioned when the late Mr. Satoru Iwata had interviewed Hino about his next game at the time, Professor Layton and the Mask of Miracles. With the deal in place, they got to work on their very first AAA title, that would soon be known as Dark Cloud. Development and presentation. With a projected development time of about 2 years, it was supposed to be a launch title for the PS2 in Japan in March 2000, but was ultimately pushed back to further polish the game and was finally released in Japan December of that very same year. The US will receive the game in May of 2001 and Europe shortly thereafter. When the PS2 was announced in March of 1999, an early demo of Dark Cloud was used to show off the power of the console by now former Sony president and CEO Ken Kataragi. The demo showed off a magic carpet flying through a valley, with some waterfall effects. In September, at the Tokyo Game Show, a playable version of the game was seen. The demo would also be showcased in November at Comdex by Phil Harrison, who at the time was vice president of the US division of Sony. The demo showed off the georama system that would go on to have major usage throughout the entire game, with GameSpot and IGN comparing it to Legend of Mana, which had a similar system at the time. This wasn't the only comparison that Dark Cloud received. GameSpot said that Toan, the main character that you play as throughout the game, looked like Link with an Alibaba twist, and compared the combat to Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. They also said the duels, Dark Cloud's QuickTime events, along with the day and night cycle, were similar to Shenmue. While I have a problem with the Zelda comparisons, as anyone who has played both games knows, there are 2 very different titles that don't play alike in any way, shape, or form, other than really basic surface level stuff. It's like comparing Wipeout HD to Forza just because you race really fast vehicles, but that is just the nature of game journalism, I guess. Extras and differences. Here's a few extra tidbits before we get into the game itself. Dark Cloud was composed and produced by Tomohito Nishiura, who worked exclusively on Level 5 titles and even made the music you're hearing in the background right now. I would be wrong if I didn't mention the one site that is the holy grail for Dark Cloud info, and that's the website shrines.rpgclassics.com, as it gives info about almost everything in the game, and this would have been a lot harder without the site. So I have to thank the maker Timber Moon for working on it and for it being as detailed as it is. And if you ever played this game for the first time, or played it before, I would recommend that you check it out. But that's not all. When Dark Cloud was released in the US, it wasn't a simple port over. The game came with new weapons and monsters, improved AI and new duels, and some of the most important of these changes is the added in-game dungeon known as the Demon Shaft. Toan now has a 5-hit combo instead of a 1 to 2 hit, the final boss having 2 phases instead of 1, though I have no visual proof of that, I've seen people say it. The Flapping Duster key item used for back floors of a certain dungeon could no longer be accessed due to a bug when porting over, and Odd Gaffer's shop having even more items than it did before. I'll give all my thoughts on these at the end of the video, so now let's get into the actual game. The game begins by telling you about an old book that was found in some ruins. Scholars have deciphered the book, telling of a story about a world and the 2 moons that encompassed it, and a young boy living within. It is not known if the story is true or the wild imagination of someone who is no longer around, but that is for you to decide. Oh, and the boy's name? It's Towan. As not to spoil too much, I'll be talking about the first area of Dark Cloud, No Room Village, and the dungeon alongside it. Skipping ahead, we can see Towan eating dinner and getting ready for the festival. We are then greeted by a young lady stating that Towan is late and they have to go. With encouragement from his mother, Towan finishes his meal, puts on his hat, and leaves. With the festival underway, it's a wonderful sight. People are dancing or playing instruments, a warm and familiar feeling that is never meant to last. A warlord, hell-bent on power and control, is overlooking the village in the night sky, and is ready to test the former. With a single swipe of the arm, his newfound weapon begins its assault on the village. Rays of purple energy rain down, destroying homes and presumably killing the villagers. Towan is left in the middle of this carnage, looking to his left and his right. He sees the girl, who he had talked to before this had all gone down. She has fallen and is about to be crushed by a collapsing windmill. Towan runs to save her, but is too late, and both are believed to have perished. It fades to black. Towan is called upon by a voice. He awakes to see an old man in front of him. The old man introduces himself as the Fairy King. In his words, an entity that unites all of nature's spirits. He tells Towan of a great danger that is now known as the Dark Genie and the man who summoned it. He states that the genie's power is so great that it can destroy the entire world. The king not only reminds Towan of his village that has been destroyed, but also the many more that have suffered the same fate. In a single night, half the world was eradicated. The king explains that the fairy's power and the genie's power are one and the same, but they are nowhere near strong enough to stop it. But not all hope is lost. The Fairy King believes Towan has what it takes to stop him. The king tells him that he has a strong will to withstand the evil that has now engulfed his world, and a clear and kind heart that will be able to fight against the darkness that the evil power generates. With a whisk of his magic wand, the fairy bestows upon Towan a magic amulet known as Atlamilia, a stone of magical power the king claims. But before Towan can get his bearings, he is teleported back to a familiar but empty field of land. The king says that this land was once Towan's village, and claims that he has the power to restore it to its original form. The king explains that before the village was destroyed, he had sealed all the buildings and people in spheres known as Atla, but due to the incredible power of the genie, were left scattered across the world. With time not on his side, Towan is tasked with restoring what has been destroyed. The king gives Towan one last piece of advice and says that he has a newfound power to open Atla and return the world to what it was, or something better. Towan, rightfully confused, is left without much else to go on until he sees what the king is talking about. The king, understanding this, tells Towan that when he finds some Atla, his lessons will continue. The king says his goodbye and flies away into the sky. Towan, now left alone, is starting to understand the power he was given, as he is now linked to nature itself. And now, with his head held high, his journey, or rather, you, the player, can now begin. Alright, so with the entrance to the game finished, the first thing you are told to do is go to the village chief's house, as he'll have supplies and the key to the dungeon you'll be spending most of your time in, known as the Divine Beast Cave. But before we go, there's a few settings you might want to know about. First, it's message display speed. Put it to speedy as you'll be reading a lot of text in this game, and this just helps out a lot, and as previously stated earlier in the video, this game has a day and night cycle and also a setting to go along with it. For right now, at this moment, I would tell you to leave it at normal, as every time that part of the day changes, the game stops and reloads the area. And putting it on speedy for no reason will just annoy you. And yes, I said parts of the day. You see, Dark Cloud's days are broken up into 4 parts, and they are morning, afternoon, dusk, and night. At first this may not seem important, and to be honest it really isn't. There are only a few things in the game that are affected by the time of day, but some of the main ones, at least here, are that fish only spawn at certain times of the day, and this also affects what item that Clyde gets you whenever you show up. So with that being said, let's enter the dungeon. When entering a dungeon, there are 2 major components that need to be kept track of to ensure your success and survival. The first of these, of course, is your health. Now, I shouldn't have to explain why that is, but there are actually a few things you need to consider when getting down in this game. When you are downed, half your money is taken and you are automatically removed from the dungeon, but there is one way to keep this specifically from happening. First, you need at least 1 party member, and an item known as stand-in powder. The powder makes it so that when you are downed, another party member takes your place and you play as them. But that doesn't mean that the character that got downed can no longer be used. Now that's when the item Revive Powder comes into play. When a party member is downed, they go into a near-death state, and the only way to get them out of it is by using revive powder. Always keep at least 3 of these on you at all times. You won't regret it. Also, 2 more things about health. There are multiple healing items in the game, mostly types of food, from bread all the way to premium meat, each healing for different amounts. The dungeon also has what are called springs, that when stood in, give back full health and the next major component, full thirst. Keep in mind that not every floor will have a spring, so don't try to rely on it too much. But wait, what's thirst? To be honest, thirst is only in the game so that you have something else to manage while in the dungeon for that added challenge. Whenever you run out of thirst, you start to take 1 point of damage for every second you don't have your thirst filled. Just like food, there are different types of water with varying degrees of thirst gain. Okay, real quick, there are a few things I would like to let you know before we move on, as I won't be going over them too much. First is that the 2 stats discussed before, along with the third known as defense, can be upgraded with these items that can be found outside of dungeons when you progress in each location, in what are called Miracle Treasure Chests. There are also status effects, and these are the items that can be used to help prevent each one. Chests are found throughout each dungeon and have randomized items, but there are 5 that matter the most. 2 always spawn in chests, and 3 of them are random. The first 2 are the map and magic crystal, that when picked up reveal the entire dungeon layout and all entities on that specific floor when they are acquired. The final 3 are the back floor key, the big chest key, and the area key. The back floor key is used in a specific location on each floor of the dungeon. For the Divine Beast Cave, it's Tramwheel. A back floor is in essence another dungeon within. It has harder monsters that in some cases can one-shot you, if you're careless. But on the same token, it has a chance to carry powerful gems that can be used to upgrade your weapons. Next is the big chest key. Along with the normal chest, there is a chance for a giant one to spawn. These almost always carry a weapon for one of your party members. I say almost because sometimes a jester will appear who gives you a chance at random items, but a good chunk of the time that you find one, they are almost always locked, so you will need a key to open it, or you can try to force it open by guessing one of the 3 traps. The first one is cursed, which makes it so that you can't switch weapons. The second is an explosion that does a set amount of damage, and the third and final one is a poison trap. I cannot stress this enough to always pick poison no matter what. The explosion should never kill you, and cursed is only really annoying. The final key is the area key. Sometimes there will be doors that can't be opened without a key, but this item will always be in a chest if a locked door is present. The last thing that I will be going over is active items. Active items vary in use and are applied in the 3 squares at the top of your screen. Some can be thrown at enemies for different effects and damage. Some stop status effects from occurring or buff the character in some way. My most used active item is Drand Feathers. They increase your movement speed by a lot and are a must have if you value your time. They can also be bought from Odd Gaffer's shop if he is uninjured. So now, let's move on to weapons. Your weapon is a very important item, and I know I'm already contradicting myself as I already said there's only 2 major components that you need to keep track of, but this is definitely the third and final one. There's a lot of depth in Dark Cloud's weapon system and one can get lost pretty fast, so I'm going to try and explain everything that you need to know about it. First is weapon HP, or WHP in its shortened form. In Dark Cloud, all weapons have durability and break when not properly maintained. Now this is very important. If any weapon breaks that is not your character's starter weapon, it will disappear and you'll lose all progress you put into it. Never let this happen. Luckily, there are a few ways to keep this from happening in the form of 2 items. These are repair powder and auto repair powder. Both return the weapon back to full, but have different ways of going about it. Repair powder is a manual item and you can either go into the menu like you would with revive powder or go into the weapons menu and press the repair button. Auto repair powder, on the other hand, is an active item that needs to be put in the top 3 slots in order to work. Now this is just my opinion, so take it how you will. Try to get into the habit of manually repairing your weapons and never rely on auto repair. Because of the nature of it being an active item, it needs to be replaced every time it is used. At some point, you're most likely going to forget that you haven't put new ones in, and your weapon's going to break and there's nothing you can do about it, so always manually repair your weapons. So now, let's talk about XP. Only weapons gain XP in this game in the form of abs. Once a weapon's XP bar is filled up, it can be upgraded. When a weapon is upgraded, the XP needed to do it again increases along with the weapon HP and damage, but only by 1 point. There's also an item in the game called Power Up Powder that can be used to level up a weapon 1 time no matter how much XP there is. To make the most out of your level up, you'll need to customize the weapon in the menu. When you first open and select your weapon of choice, you'll be met with a few options: equipped, customize, attribute, repair, upgrade if it's currently possible to do so, and build up. We will be going over most of these, but for right now, we need to customize. When you enter a weapon, you will be met with its stats in 2 to 4 squares. These squares are for your attachments. The blue one is for synth spheres and normal attachments. Real quick, a synth sphere is a weapon that has been broken down into an attachment keeping 60% of its overall stats at the cost of the weapon, unless it was a starter weapon. For this to be done, the weapon needs to be +5 and an option to break down will appear. Once clicked, an animation will play out and you'll have a synth sphere. A few useful tips about them is that they are not locked to any weapon type and can be used freely. Very few weapons in the game have special effects on them, and this is the only way to give a weapon a special effect that did not have one originally. These are all the attachments in the game, and each one stating what it will give to the weapon. When you put 2 attachments in, you can now level up. Your first time doing this will almost always be your starting weapon, so the option build up will not be present. What's build up, you asked? Alright, so every weapon in the game has an upgrade path to a stronger weapon. This can get overwhelming and annoying very fast without a guide, as a lot of weapons' upgrade paths run into or sometimes on top of each other. It's not uncommon to build up to a weapon that you already have a weaker version of. Save yourself the tears and just use the weapon build up guide on Shrine's website. Last but not least is the attribute and anti-stats of the weapon. These are upgraded using the correct attachment stated. The attribute of a weapon is its elemental damage multiplier, and there are 6 in total: fire, ice, thunder, wind, holy, and plane. This only affects how much damage you will or won't do to a monster. You cannot freeze with ice and you cannot set a mob on fire. Okay, so with that being said, let's get on to Atla in the overworld. Atla is found inside of dungeons and is used within the diorama system. It can only be acquired by towing, so make sure you keep them alive. When you feel like you have enough Atla, you can leave the dungeon and start messing around with the diorama system. When out in the overworld, the first thing you do is press the select button or left on the touchpad if you're playing on the PS4 port, and you'll be given a bird's eye view of the land and you can move and look around freely. Next, you'll want to press the triangle button. This brings up the menu that you'll get to know a lot about throughout your time playing. You can configure and assemble, move and remove, or look at the diorama analysis. First is config/assembly. Here you'll set up everything to be placed in the overworld. On your left and your right is all the items you've collected with Atla so far. On the left is the house that needs to be built, and on the right is the items used to finish said house. Every building will have 2 hidden slots, so in order to finish a home you will need everyone who lives in the house, as they will tell you what they want. But only one member of each household will have a special request. This will always be the owner of the home. A special request is a little bit of a guide on how each area is supposed to be built, and you can keep track of this by going to the diorama analysis. Here you can see the area broken down into 3 parts: how many diorama items you have collected, how many buildings you have completed, and how many requests you have filled. Now you can build the world any way you want, but it's best to do all the requests as you get powerful rewards for doing so. Sometimes the requests can be tricky, so if you ever get stuck, just go to the Shrine's website and it will all be there. When a house is finished, an event will play out, and you'll be given a reward by the owner of said house. The rewards vary but are almost always useful. One last thing, do not build Odd Gaffer's shop the moment you get the Atla. Wait for Paige's house to be done first, because if you don't, Gaffer's event will play out with him getting hurt and selling less items, and you do not want this to happen, as it can set you back a few hours because he doesn't have the useful items he did before. So with that being said, it's time for the end. Darkcloud is a beautiful game filled with amazing dungeons, stunning bosses, wonderful heroes, and a world that you can get lost in. It's crazy to me to think about that this is the very reason why I still play games today. From watching my uncle beat the final boss to finally doing it myself all those years ago. I just wanted to do something I really cared about, and this was it. Thank you, Akihiro Hino, for making this great game, and thank you for watching to the end. I hope you learned as much as I did, and I hope you enjoyed. You can follow me on Twitter at ShroudPanda, and follow me on Instagram at ShroudedPanda for the latest info on what I'm doing next. And stay frosty. Till next time.